It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebest. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tejas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you found us on the radio, maybe you found us online. Regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, subscribe. Better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you just take a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career, building a nest egg, 30, 40, maybe 50 plus years, shutting it off on Retirement Friday without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we continue our series on retirement happiness. Society tells us that retirement is the time when we can truly live and be happy. But does retirement make good on that promise? And furthermore, what makes us happy in the first place? Today we talk about the spousal connection. Retirement is a big life change, especially for your marriage. Many retirees never consider how necessary it is to reevaluate the roles and responsibilities in the home post-retirement. In this podcast, Ben will tell you how to communicate these new roles so your spouse doesn't say, the worst part of retirement is spending every moment with that person. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, welcome back to the show. We are continuing our series on retirement happiness, and we are really getting into the depth of your relational biosphere here the last several weeks, and we're going to take another step deeper into that. We are going to talk about your spousal relationship, and we are calling today's show Till Death Do Us Part. Before we get to today's show, I just want to give a quick reminder. Our next online event is coming up on Wednesday, June 28th at noon Central Time. It is called The Top 3 Retirement Lies, What They Are, and How to Avoid Them. For nearly a century, retirement has been a flawed concept rooted in lies which rarely get challenged or questioned. And if you follow these lies, they can lead to massive missteps for a retiree. And while conventional retirement planning wisdom has good intentions, it may not deliver on creating the most fulfilling and rewarding retirement experience. So join us on Wednesday, June 28th, noon Central Time. Ben Tejas and myself, we're going to expose the top 3 retirement lies that we have seen in our experience and how you can avoid them. As with all of our online events, this one is totally free. It's a free Zoom call, but you have to register to get the link. And the way that you do that is by going to our website, retirerepurpose.com. You're going to see a link right at the top of the page. And here's the deal. If you can't join us on the 28th at noon Central Time, not a big deal, because if you register, we will give you the email with the replay links right to your inbox after the event. So just make sure you register by going to retirerepurposed.com. Ben Tejas joins me on the show here today, and we had a bit of a chuckle over the title of today's show. To be honest with you, I just go with what comes to mind. And since we were talking about marriage today, you and I are both very happily married. I figured this was a very viable topic.
Yeah, I think it is, Jared. Unfortunately, my wife listens to this show from time to time, so we'll see how this goes. But honey, I'm sorry. And I think so many times when we speak on this show, we go through a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah, we're talking to ourselves.
We're talking to ourselves many times. A couple of guys going through midlife crisis, and I think any big life change like retirement comes with similarities with others. So today, as we talk through kind of the spousal connection piece, I think just know that, we don't have it all figured out, but, in 20 years of meeting with retirees and 20 years of seeing people, retire and then kind of, move on to the next chapter in their life, I've seen certain patterns develop, and hopefully today's show really helps some people who are, maybe struggling in this aspect.
Yeah, I think the retirement conversation is so much financial related, that this is definitely a facet of retirement that is not talked about enough and can really sneak up on you if not, it doesn't come in, you don't go into it with the proper mindset and expectations. Let's talk about last week. Again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but last week we talked about connecting with your adult children and your grandchildren, a very important show that's near and dear to us. Just give us kind of the maybe a takeaway or two that you had from last week's show.
Well, I think it really starts with talking and communicating with your adult children, figuring out how you can add value to their life. It seems pretty basic, but it's so important. Many times retirees don't do that. They just move into, we tend to get very self-focused when we do. And it's like, okay, I've got more time, so where do I want to spend that time? Well, it's with my grandchildren, so I'm going to make this happen. Start with asking them how you can add value.
I think that was a big one for me. Ask them how and if or where they want you to plug in. And another big one for me is that the retiree or the grandparent relationship with your kids and your grandkids is really, it's a supportive partnership. And again, to your point, have the conversation, have the right expectation. Ask them, how do you want us to add value to you and your children's lives? And I think that would be just a great conversation to get started.
Yeah, and don't parent until you're invited into that role, right? You've already parented your children and continue to parent your adult children. In some ways, they will look at you. Yesterday, Father's Day, I still look to my dad many times for wisdom, and there's times that you're still parenting, but when it comes to your grandchildren, unless invited in to become that parent role, which sometimes happens,
right.
But unless you're invited, that's not your role.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you missed last week's show, again, go to iTunes, go to where you found this podcast, go back, listen to that show. Very important. If you're not a grandparent, but this would be a great show for your parents to listen to, maybe you send them a link. That'd be another great way to use this resource. All right, so today we're going to talk about the spousal relationship again, till death do us part. This is, again, we're going to go a little bit deeper here into that relationship with the spouse. And really, I think a great place to get started, Ben, is this story that you tell of a client meeting that really, I think, has the essence of what exactly we're talking about here today.
Yeah, Jared, I'll never forget that meeting, and it was several years ago now. But I was in meeting with a few clients of mine, and we were talking through their new retirement and the time that they had. It was going really well, and all of a sudden, the husband stood up to leave, and he said, "Yeah, I just got to use the restroom real quick." So he stepped out, and I can still remember, Jared, the sound, the click the door made when the door shut, because his wife looked at me and said, "Ben, I just have to be honest real quick. Do you know what is the absolute worst part of being retired? It's spending every waking moment with that man." And I'll never forget it, because in my mind, I was like, well, this, and all our conversations up until that point were, this is so great. Right. It's like newlyweds again. It's blah, blah, blah. And the reality of it is, as we continued to talk about that, and when he came back into the room, I helped them talk through this newfound freedom of time, which meant a little less freedom for her.
Yeah.
But it was when we left that meeting, it was a really healthy spot. And what we came to realize are some of the things we're talking about today. And it's so important that you realize that all of a sudden, all that new free time can feel smothering for your spouse.
Well, we say it every single show. This is a massive life change. And again, just think about it. If you've never considered this, let's just assume that your husband or your wife works 40 hours a week. That's a fairly long time. That's like 1/3 of a day, 5 days a week. Now all of a sudden they're in the house during that time. I would even tell you from my experience, I rarely work from home. You know me, I do like the office, but I've got a lot of small kids around the house. If there are those days where I work from home, my kids are like, "Can you go to work by the end of the day?" Because I start getting all involved in their business, and it's just another parent they have around. I think, again, we underestimate the dynamic of the house changes drastically due to this one little concept.
Yeah, I don't think we give that piece of it enough credit. How different things are. Certainly for the home, certainly for our spouse, certainly if you've got retirement at different times of life, what that can do to your relationship. So I'm really glad we're talking about this today. I think one of the biggest things that you need to point out right away, Jared, when we look at this is we think that all of this newfound time together will be an easy, good thing, right? The reality of it is, though, that you're not newlyweds anymore. I look at, when I was first married with my wife, I mean, we were, so close, right? And I think picture a V, right? And the beginning of this V is newlyweds, and you're together all the time, and you're this newfound love, and everything is all the time you're together, and it's great. You want that time, and eventually, what can happen is life begins to separate. So if that point of that V is being newly married, you get slightly further apart as you move into career, as you have a pet, as you have a dog or a cat, and then you have children, and then pretty soon your career gets bigger, and you kind of go off, and by the time that you're ready to retire and kind of become really close again, if you will, now you're way out here separated, and wham, you come back together all at once. And I think that is something that people don't give enough credit to, of just how big of a life change that is for both spouses.
I think a lot of couples may have experienced this on a smaller scale when they are probably first empty nesters, and now all of a sudden the main conversation in the car ride or over dinner might not be about the children. You had a bit of an experience with that one time where it was like you were on a trip. You said you were on a trip with your wife, and it's like as soon as we got done talking about the kids, it was like, I don't have it. What else do we talk about? Who are we? Why are we here?
I mean, so it can be, and that was, I think it was like a 10-year, 15-year wedding anniversary. Yeah. We went up and took a 6-hour drive up to Duluth, and it was like the first couple hours, and all of a sudden I was like, we looked at each other and we're like, wow, but I think that's real. I think if people are honest with each other, I think some of that's okay, right? The focus of you right then is your children, and your children will continue to be part of your life. But I think all of a sudden you realize when you get further and further apart, and then you're just right back together, it will take some time potentially to, find new hobbies together, to find things together. It's a lot deeper than that. It's like, hey, let's just find a hobby. Right. It gets so much deeper than that. But the reality of it is you were really, really close, kind of separated throughout time to some extent by life, and then you come right back together.
Yeah, I think it can be. It doesn't have to be a time where it puts strife. I think that unfortunately is what we see. But we're going to talk about today ways that you can make this now be a place where you rediscover each other, that where now your marriage gets deeper, more intimate, and is better. That's, again, how retirement can really play into this in such a positive role. So let's talk about what should people do? What's some tactical things here? How do people approach this whole topic?
Well, step one is communication, Jared. I mean, step one is sitting down before, hopefully, retirement, having some real expectations of what I think this is going to look like. But you need to sit down, with your spouse and say, here are my responsibilities now, and here's how they will change. Same thing. I've met with clients over the years where, let's say, the woman has been in the home and kind of felt her mini retirement when the kids left the house, right? And now has things kind of how she's in. She dialed in, and husband all of a sudden retires from his career, and he comes back and he's like, well, I'm just used to doing things a certain way. I'm sorry, but your roles and responsibilities inside the home have to be adjusted to some extent at that point.
Yeah, give kind of an example. What do you mean by that? Is it just kind of daily chores, or where would you go with that?
Well, Jared, I think a good example is right now in my family, I've got a limited amount of time because I'm at the office, just 40 to 50 hours a week, 60 maybe some weeks, right? So I get busy and I come home, and if I'm tasked with kind of take the garbage out, keep the property, the things that my wife doesn't like to do around the home, and then I retire and I say, okay, now I'm no longer spending those hours at the office, and I just say, yeah, I'm just going to keep doing the lawn mowing, honey. How's that sound? Right. I think I will and should get some pushback. I think there needs to be a delineation of roles and responsibilities early into retirement, say, okay, what does this look like?
Yeah.
But again, it starts with just good communication. What are your expectations for me, honey? How can we best live together?
Sure.
So I think it starts with just open communication about roles and responsibilities.
Even going back to our conversation from last week where the parents, the retirees, can have the open conversation with their adult children. How can I partner with you? How can I add value to your life? How do you want me to kind of plug in, so to speak? It's kind of a similar conversation. Really like, okay, now I don't have this time, or I've got more time to spend with you. How can I help you support the house and whatnot? I feel like it's kind of a parallel conversation.
This one's going to get me, but I think every relationship needs better communication. And mine is the same. It's like if I could come home at night and the first thing I do right off the bat, I set the tone by saying, honey, how was your day? How are things going? How can I help you? It's going to dramatically change the rest of our time together. So I think when we look at communicating with our spouses, again, and we communicate expectations, I think it goes even beyond just the simple like household chores that we're talking about. It goes way beyond that. It goes into how much time in this newfound chapter of retirement do you see us spending together? How much time do you see us spending apart? What does time away from the house look like? How much time do we need with just ourselves? I mean, all that communication needs to happen early and often for a new retiree.
And we always say in our household, sometimes like mommy just needs a little bit of a break, and then she reminds the kids very gently that time makes the heart grow fonder.
Yes.
we joke with that, but I think there probably is some validity to that. I think it would be naive to say that now once people retire and couples retire, now you could and should spend every waking second together. That's probably not a blanket statement that applies to everybody.
It doesn't. I mean, going back to that first story from that client, he was smothering her. He was like, now I got all this time. We're going to be together, right? That was his expectation what retirement was going to be. It is healthy and normal, and in fact, better for you not to be together all the time. I'll say it. There are certain things that your spouse cannot give you. I'm going to be very clear with that. So there's certain things in my relationship right now. My wife, I need some friends. I need guys that we can spend time doing things that we do together. She needs time. This morning, she went on a walk with one of her best friends, and she was able to talk about things that she just wouldn't talk about with me. Just because you're retired, or if you're not, you cannot look to your spouse to fulfill you, certainly. You're not going to find your identity through your spouse. That's certainly very clear. We know, where to find and root our identity. If we're waiting for somebody else to do that, I think that's going to be a problem.
Yeah. Again, just like with how career and job gives us the easy outlet for purpose, career and job gives us the easy separation that now you have to re-engineer into our life. That's a reoccurring theme that I see with all these shows that we do. It's really a reconstruction of the flow of your life, reconstruction of the flow of your time, and even a reconstruction of kind of the dynamic of your relationships, and this one's no different.
Yeah, it is. I think as people retire, they have to, number one, recognize there needs to be awareness that your life is changing. There needs to be awareness that you retiring, if your spouse wasn't retired or is retired, is going to change and impact their life. And then you have to communicate and begin that communication with, how can I best serve you, right? I think we know from really how Jesus modeled his life. It was servant, right? He was a servant, the servant of all. So I think if we can look more and more to serve those around us, whether it be in our family or communities, man, we're going to find out that we're going to actually get more from that.
You've mentioned a couple of times here spouses that retire at different times. It's just not it's not normal and very common that you have two working parties and they both retire on the same Friday. Talk about that dynamic and what happens to both parties.
Yeah, far more normal actually for people to see and go through that stage of life at different times. So, I think again, I go back to the story of my friend Jim, who one of my first, really I think in the book, one of the first stories I tell is about Jim and how he retired and his wife was still working. And what happened for him, and I think this is really the warning sign I think that most people should hear is, if you're retiring first and you don't fill your time with things that are meaningful, and meanwhile your spouse is out working, he slept in the morning. By the time he got up, she was out the door. There's part of him, I think, that began to feel like, oh man, I'm not accomplishing anything today. Oh man, my wife's out there doing that. I mean, I'm less than. I've made this step earlier in my life. I mean, he was a few years older, and just in a different spot of life. So he actually looked at himself. He started to look down on himself actually because he didn't have that. So of course, well, pass some time with TV, and then of course when she comes back from work, he's like right up in her face. He's like, hey, what are we gonna do tonight? What are we gonna do? And she's really tired, right? Because she's had a full day of work. So what we tend to see again is when people retire at different times, they need to realize, again, by looking at the other person's schedule, that they're not going through the same thing you are. And both parties need to recognize and communicate, again, expectations in order for it to be really a healthy step.
Yeah, if you're not familiar, the Jim story is mentioned in Ben's book, Repurpose, The Untold Story of Retirement in America. But he was a factory worker, active, engaged, retired before he should have. And if you don't know the story, go read the book. But basically, as you mentioned, started watching more TV, slowing down physically, and then that started to affect his mental health, which is a whole nother podcast to talk about. But I can just kind of see how this would spiral downwards. Now all of a sudden you have somebody whose mental health is starting to decline, and then the strain that would put on the wife and the pressure that would put on her. Boy, it's easy to see how this could kind of come off the rails pretty fast.
Yeah, I think he was, again, looking to her to kind of help him through that, and it really wasn't her role at that time. It wasn't her job. She actually wasn't in the stage of life that he was, and then he wasn't connected. Like I said earlier, he was looking to just her to fulfill all those things, but she couldn't do it. He didn't have the friends outside of work, right? So he walked away from that. So I think the combination of all that, and again, he aged so rapidly, Jared. It was one of the it was one of those moments in my career where I said, we're doing it wrong. And I think so many times retirement professionals today do it wrong because we fail to look at, numbers might be fine, the balance sheets, the full plan looks good, but the person themselves are not ready, or they're not fully comprehending how big of a life change that it is.
We got a couple minutes left. You touched on this one as well, but talk about, like, again, the effect on the marriage to the stay-at-home mom who didn't have the career but kind of felt that little mini retirement experience once the kids left the house.
Well, yeah, Jerry, I think to the stay-at-home mom, what a wonderful vocation. And, my wife has spent years teaching, but also at home with our children, and it's been amazing. But I think to realize that when the kids leave the home, both and step into the world, there is a mini retirement there. There is a true life change, more importantly for the spouse that's at home than the one that's working. So it starts with recognizing that. Yep. Understand this is bigger for them probably than it is for you as the spouse that's out in working a different career.
Yeah.
So you start there by realizing how big that is, but then also for that spouse that went through that retirement. That mini retirement when the kids left the house, you can now step into helping your spouse who is retiring later because you felt some of those things.
Sure.
You felt some of the loss of maybe identity, which again, if you're a stay-at-home mom, your identity shouldn't be found in your children, but it's a whole nother podcast. But helping your spouse that's retiring now walk through that kind of change in lifestyle, you've got expertise. You have done that once already. So doing that together at that point can really be healthy. And you can play a huge role in that.
Yeah. Again, we got about a minute left here, but I'm reminded the delicate balancing act of this season of life. And again, just kind of looking at this thing from a 30,000 foot view, the amount of preparation that I think is necessary to really make retirement everything it's supposed to be. There are so many facets of life that you need to look at, address, be aware of. It's not just a financial conversation. It's just so much deeper than that.
It is, Jared. One of the scariest statistics we're seeing is that divorce rates among retirees are going up. And I think people aren't prepared for this. We need to be talking about it. And if you are going through that with your spouse, you're listening to this show today, and you're like, yeah, something is off, and this has been a bigger change than we gave it credit. Go see somebody talk to somebody. Start with your spouse and try to get closer together. But if you can't do it together, find another person, a counselor, somebody to step in, because I think the first thing is realizing it's a huge life change and you're feeling this way. It's okay. You just might need a little bit of help just to make sure, Jared, that you're walking into complete fullness in retirement, especially within your marriage.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.